In the quiet path of awareness, there are moments when life seems to gather like clouds before rain. Not to punish, not to reward, but to reveal what was always hidden within us. It is said among seekers that certain days carry the weight of reflection more than others. One such turning point is the closing of April, when the mind feels the urgency of change, and the heart becomes sensitive to unseen disturbances in its own balance. Whether these disturbances are called luck, fortune, or flow, they are in truth only reflections of inner harmony or disorder. When people speak of an emergency cleansing, they are not speaking only of objects, spaces, or rituals. They are speaking of the mind that has gathered dust from worry, regret, envy, and fear. These are the true burdens that cloud perception. And when perception is clouded, even abundance feels like scarcity, and even peace feels distant. There is a teaching hidden in simple observation. What we cling to, we fear to lose. What we fear to lose, we begin to distort. Thus, the idea of protecting luck is not about guarding something outside ourselves, but about returning to a state where nothing within is scattered. As April draws to its end, the mind often becomes reflective. It looks back at what was started, what was delayed, what was lost, and what still remains unresolved. In that reflection lies both danger and opportunity. Danger if one becomes trapped in judgment. Opportunity if one turns inward with clarity. To cleanse in the deepest sense is to release the heaviness of unfinished thoughts. It is to forgive what cannot be changed, to accept what has already unfolded, and to gently set down the burden of controlling what is yet to come. When this is done, life does not suddenly become magical, it simply becomes clear. And in clarity, even small things appear as blessings. Those who live with awareness understand that no final date holds power over destiny, but symbolic moments can awaken discipline. They remind the wandering mind that time is passing and that presence is always available but rarely entered. If there is a protection worth seeking, it is the protection of inner stillness. When stillness is maintained, confusion cannot easily enter. When confusion is reduced, actions become precise. And when actions become precise, what people call good fortune begins to follow naturally, not as a gift from outside, but as the result of inner alignment. So as the end of April approaches in the human calendar, let it serve as a gentle reminder rather than a fear. Not a deadline imposed by fate, but an invitation to return to simplicity. Observe your thoughts without being carried by them. Release what has become heavy. Speak less of worry and more of understanding. And in doing so, you will find that nothing essential was ever truly lost, only covered by layers of distraction. In this way, protection is not something done once on a chosen date. It becomes a way of living moment by moment, where the mind is kept clear, the heart remains open, and life is met without resistance. And when life is met without resistance, there is nothing left to protect, only something to experience fully as it is. The cleansing is mental, not material. The speech emphasizes that real spiritual cleansing is about clearing the mind from worries, regrets, fear, and negative emotions, rather than relying on external rituals or objects. True cleansing in its deepest sense is not found in the arrangement of objects, the repetition of actions, or the changing of external surroundings. It begins within the silent space of awareness, where thoughts arise and dissolve without resistance. The human mind often believes that disturbance comes from outside sources, but in truth, every experience is first shaped internally before it is ever reflected in the world. When the mind is burdened with worry, fear, anger, or unresolved memories, even the calmest environment feels heavy. Yet when the mind is clear, even the most chaotic situation loses its power to disturb. This understanding reveals why mental cleansing is more essential than any outward practice. Thoughts, like dust carried by wind, gather quietly over time. One does not always notice how they accumulate. A small judgment here, a lingering regret there, an unspoken fear carried from yesterday, and soon the inner space becomes crowded. When this happens, perception becomes distorted. The world is no longer seen as it is, but as it is filtered through emotional residue. This is the state that many mistakenly interpret as misfortune or imbalance in their lives. To cleanse the mind is not to fight these thoughts or suppress them. It is to observe them with gentle awareness, without attachment or rejection. When a thought of anger arises, it is simply recognized as anger. When a memory of loss appears, it is acknowledged without being relived. In this way, thoughts lose their authority to control behavior and emotion. They become passing events rather than defining truths. As awareness strengthens, a subtle shift begins. The mind starts to create space between itself and its experiences. In this space, clarity naturally arises. Decisions become less reactive and more intentional. Emotional turbulence no longer dictates action. This is the beginning of true cleansing, not a dramatic transformation, but a quiet settling, like muddy water slowly becoming clear when left undisturbed. Many seek cleansing through external rituals because they are visible and immediate. However, external actions alone cannot reach the root of inner disturbance. One may clean a room, rearrange objects, or perform symbolic acts, yet if the mind remains cluttered, the sense of heaviness returns. This is because the origin of imbalance was never outside in the first place. It was always within perception. When mental cleansing is practiced consistently, even ordinary moments begin to feel lighter. Conversations become clearer, reactions soften, and patience naturally increases. The mind no longer rushes to label experiences as good or bad, fortunate or unfortunate. Instead, it begins to observe life as a continuous unfolding process. In this state, what people often call luck loses its mysterious nature. It is no longer seen as something granted or withdrawn by external forces. Instead, it is recognized as the natural outcome of a mind that is unburdened. When there is less internal noise, opportunities are noticed more clearly. When there is less emotional resistance, actions align more effectively with circumstances. Thus, true cleansing is not an emergency response to a specific moment or date. It is a continuous practice of returning to awareness. It is the willingness to see clearly again and again without being carried away by the accumulation of thoughts. In this clarity, the mind becomes open, responsive, and steady. And in such a mind, there is nothing to chase and nothing to fear, only the quiet experience of being present as life unfolds. Luck is a reflection of inner state. What people call luck or fortune is actually a result of inner harmony. When the mind is calm and balanced, life feels more fortunate and smooth. When the mind begins to settle into awareness, a deeper layer of understanding unfolds. It becomes clear that what disturbs human life is rarely the events themselves, but the interpretation placed upon them. Every experience enters the mind as a neutral occurrence, yet it is quickly shaped into meaning through memory, expectation, and emotion. This shaping process is so constant that most people no longer notice it happening. They believe they are reacting directly to reality when in fact they are reacting to their own inner commentary about reality. This is why inner cleansing is considered essential for clarity. Without it, perception remains clouded by accumulated impressions. The past quietly colors the present, and fear of the future quietly influences present choices. In such a state, life feels unstable, not because life itself is unstable, but because the lens through which it is viewed is constantly shifting. When awareness is weak, even small challenges appear overwhelming. When awareness is strong, even larger challenges are seen with balance. As understanding deepens, one begins to see that thoughts are not commands but movements. They rise on their own, shaped by countless conditions, experiences, environment, conditioning, and subconscious memory. Yet the mind often identifies with these thoughts so strongly that it forgets its own space of observation. It becomes entangled, believing I am this thought or this thought defines me. This identification is the root of much inner disturbance. True cleansing, therefore, is the gentle separation of awareness from this identification. It is not rejection of thought, but recognition of its temporary nature. When a thought of fear arises, it is seen as a passing formation. When a thought of desire arises, it is seen as another passing formation. Neither is held as absolute truth. Over time, this practice creates a stable inner ground from which life is experienced more directly. In this clarity, emotional reactions begin to soften. Situations that once triggered strong responses no longer carry the same weight. There is still feeling, but it is no longer overwhelming. There is still thought, but it no longer dominates. This is not indifference, but balance. The mind remains engaged with life, yet not consumed by it. From this balanced state, one also begins to notice how external conditions are often reflections of internal order. When the mind is scattered, actions become scattered. When attention is divided, results become inconsistent. When inattention is high, even simple tasks feel difficult. Conversely, when the mind is quiet, actions become efficient and aligned. What is often labeled as good timing or fortunate outcome is frequently the natural expression of a mind that is not obstructed by confusion. This understanding removes the need to chase control over external circumstances. Instead, attention shifts inward to maintaining clarity. It becomes more important to observe the state of the mind than to manipulate outcomes. In doing so, life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a process of continuous adjustment. Inner cleansing in this sense is not a single event but an ongoing awareness. It does not depend on dates, rituals, or symbolic deadlines. It depends on the willingness to see clearly in each moment without distortion. As this clarity deepens, the mind becomes less reactive and more responsive. It begins to meet life as it is rather than as it is feared or desired to be. In such a state, peace is not something achieved after effort. It is the natural background of a mind that is no longer entangled. And in that simplicity, life flows without resistance, carrying with it a sense of ease that does not depend on conditions but on understanding. End-of-month reflection creates awareness. The end of April is symbolically used to represent a moment of reflection, reviewing past actions, unresolved emotions, and personal growth opportunities. When awareness becomes steady enough to observe the mind without distortion, a subtle but powerful realization begins to form. Most human suffering is not created by life itself, but by resistance to life as it is. This resistance is rarely obvious. It does not always appear as open conflict or loud emotional struggle. More often it exists quietly in the background as comparison, expectation, interpretation, and silent disagreement with reality. The mind continuously measures what is happening against what it believes should be happening, and in that gap discomfort is born. Inner clarity develops when this gap begins to close. It does not close through force or denial, but through understanding. One starts to see that every moment is already complete in its own unfolding. Even experiences that are labeled as difficult or undesirable are still part of the same flow of existence. They arise, remain for a while, and then dissolve. Nothing stays fixed unless the mind keeps it alive through repeated attention and emotional reinforcement. This is why cleansing the inner world is not about removing experiences, but about changing the relationship with them. When the mind is untrained, it tends to cling to pleasant moments and reject unpleasant ones. This creates imbalance because life naturally contains both. Clinging leads to attachment and rejection leads to tension. Both create disturbance. When awareness deepens, both are seen as temporary expressions. The mind begins to rest in observation rather than judgment. In this state of observation, even thoughts lose their ability to dominate. A thought may arise suggesting fear about the future, but instead of being followed, it is simply seen. Another thought may arise recalling a past mistake, but it is also seen without identification. Gradually, the habit of reacting weakens. In its place, a quiet space of noticing becomes more stable. This space is not empty in a negative sense, but open and receptive, like the sky that holds all weather without being affected by it. As this openness strengthens, the idea of external luck begins to lose its fixed meaning. What once seemed random or controlled by unseen forces is now understood differently. Outcomes are seen as the result of many interacting conditions, including one's own mental state. When the mind is cluttered, perception narrows and opportunities are missed. When the mind is clear, perception widens and possibilities become visible. In this way, what people call fortune is closely linked with clarity of attention and stability of mind. There is also a natural purification that happens when inner resistance decreases. Emotions still arise, but they flow more freely without becoming trapped. Anger appears and passes without leaving long-lasting residue. Sadness is experienced fully but does not harden into prolonged suffering. Joy is appreciated without the fear of losing it. Everything is allowed to move through awareness without being held too tightly. This fluidity creates a sense of lightness in daily life. Actions become simpler because they are not weighed down by excessive mental commentary. Decisions become clearer because they are not clouded by contradictory inner voices. Even challenges become easier to navigate because the mind is not fighting them internally while trying to deal with them externally. In such a condition, cleansing is no longer seen as a task or emergency response. It becomes a natural way of living. Each moment offers an opportunity to return to clarity, to release unnecessary mental accumulation, and to rest again in simple awareness. There is no final point where cleansing is complete, because the mind is always interacting with new experiences. However, there is a continuous deepening of stability where disturbance has less and less hold. Ultimately, what is discovered is that peace was never something to be created or protected from outside threats. It was always present as the natural state of awareness itself. What obscured it was only accumulation of thoughts, reactions, and unexamined patterns. As these layers are gently seen and released, what remains is not something new, but something timeless. A clear, quiet presence that is not dependent on conditions, and does not fear change because it is not separate from it. Letting go is the key to clarity. Forgiveness, acceptance, and releasing control over the past and future are presented as essential steps to achieve inner peace and clarity. When the mind becomes quieter and observation deepens, there is a gradual shift in how life is understood. What once appeared as a series of separate events begins to reveal itself as a continuous flow of causes and conditions. Nothing stands alone. Every moment is linked to countless preceding influences, many of which are subtle and unseen. This understanding weakens the tendency to blame isolated events for inner disturbance and instead encourages a broader awareness of how experience unfolds. In this expanded awareness, the idea of protection changes meaning. People often think of protection as holding something valuable in place or shielding it from harm. But from the perspective of inner clarity, what truly needs protection is not external fortune or outcomes, but the stability of attention itself. When attention is stable, the mind does not scatter into unnecessary fear or speculation. It remains grounded in what is present rather than being pulled into imagined scenarios or emotional extremes. As this stability grows, one begins to notice how much energy is lost through mental repetition. The mind replays conversations, reimagines past situations, and constructs future possibilities that may never occur. Each repetition strengthens emotional residue, making the mind heavier and less responsive to the present. Inner cleansing, therefore, is closely linked to reducing unnecessary repetition. It is not about forcing silence, but about recognizing when thought is no longer useful and gently returning to awareness. This process naturally brings a sense of simplicity. Life does not become smaller, but it becomes less burdened. The same external responsibilities remain, but the internal commentary around them decreases. Tasks are approached with more directness without the added weight of excessive judgment. In this simplicity, even challenges feel more manageable because they are not amplified by internal resistance. Over time, the distinction between inner and outer begins to soften. It becomes clear that the quality of experience is shaped from within. A calm mind perceives order even in complexity, while a restless mind perceives confusion even in simplicity. This does not mean external conditions are irrelevant, but rather that they are interpreted through the lens of awareness. When that lens is clear, interpretation becomes accurate and balanced. Emotions also begin to lose their overwhelming grip. They still arise, sometimes strongly, but they are no longer mistaken for identity. Instead of saying I am anger or I am sadness, there is recognition that anger is present or sadness is present. This small shift in language reflects a deeper shift in understanding. It creates space between awareness and experience, allowing emotions to be fully felt without becoming consuming. In this space, resilience develops naturally. Not the kind of resilience that resists difficulty, but the kind that remains steady within it. Life continues to bring change, uncertainty, and unexpected turns, but the mind is less shaken by them. There is less need to control outcomes because there is greater trust in the ability to respond appropriately to whatever arises. This trust is not blind belief, but the result of direct observation. Time and experience reveal that when the mind is clear, responses tend to be more effective. When the mind is clouded, even simple decisions become complicated. This repeated observation builds confidence in clarity itself rather than in external guarantees. Gradually, the idea of emergency cleansing loses urgency and becomes unnecessary as a concept. Cleansing is no longer something reserved for specific moments or symbolic deadlines. It becomes a continuous unfolding of awareness, where each moment offers a fresh opportunity to release unnecessary mental accumulation. In this way, life is no longer divided into times of confusion. Instead, there is an ongoing movement toward greater understanding. Some moments are more stable, some more turbulent, but all are part of the same process of learning how to remain aware within change. And in that awareness, what is most essential is already present. A quiet, steady presence that is not dependent on conditions, yet fully capable of engaging with them. Stillness creates natural flow in life when the mind is still and free from confusion. Actions become clearer, and life begins to feel aligned. What people interpret as good luck naturally follows. When understanding deepens beyond surface perception, the mind begins to recognize that what is often called luck is not a separate force acting upon life, but a reflection of alignment between attention, intention, and action. This alignment does not come from external timing alone, nor from isolated efforts made at specific moments. It arises gradually from the ongoing condition of the inner world. When the inner world is scattered, experiences feel fragmented. When it is coherent, experiences feel connected and meaningful. At this stage of awareness, cleansing is understood less as a corrective action and more as a continuous refinement of perception. Just as a mirror reflects clearly only when it is free of dust, the mind reflects reality accurately only when it is not clouded by unresolved emotional residue. The dust of the mind is not physical, it consists of accumulated impressions, judgments, expectations, and unprocessed experiences that remain active beneath conscious awareness. These impressions influence behavior in subtle ways. A past disappointment may quietly affect present confidence. An unacknowledged fear may shape decisions without being directly recognized. A strong desire may distort perception, making certain outcomes appear more important than they actually are. Because these influences operate beneath the surface, they often go unnoticed, yet they continuously shape the quality of experience. Inner cleansing, therefore, is the process of bringing these hidden influences into awareness. Not to eliminate them aggressively, but to understand them clearly. When something is seen clearly, its unconscious power begins to weaken. A fear that is recognized loses its grip. A desire that is understood becomes less compulsive. A memory that is observed without resistance becomes less emotionally charged. This gradual weakening of unconscious influence creates space for more conscious living. As this space expands, the mind becomes less reactive. Situations that once triggered immediate emotional responses are now met with greater composure. This does not mean that feelings disappear, but that they no longer dominate behavior. There is a growing ability to pause internally, even in the presence of strong stimuli, and to respond rather than react. This pause is the foundation of clarity. In such clarity, life begins to feel less like a series of unpredictable disruptions and more like a continuous process of interaction. Events are no longer seen as isolated blessings or misfortunes, but as part of an interconnected flow. This shift in perception reduces anxiety about control, because it becomes clear that not everything needs to be controlled in order to be understood or navigated effectively. Over time, even the concept of protecting luck becomes unnecessary. What is actually being protected is not an external force, but the quality of attention itself. When attention is scattered, life feels unstable. When attention is gathered, life feels coherent. This coherence allows for more effective action, better timing, and clearer perception of opportunities that were always present but previously unnoticed. There is also a natural softening of the need for certainty. The mind begins to accept that uncertainty is not a flaw in life but an inherent characteristic of it. Instead of resisting uncertainty, awareness learns to move with it. This flexibility creates resilience, not by eliminating change but by reducing resistance to change. In this way, cleansing becomes indistinguishable from awareness itself. It is no longer a separate practice or an urgent requirement tied to specific dates or symbolic thresholds. It becomes the ongoing act of seeing clearly, moment after moment, without accumulating unnecessary mental weight. And as this clarity stabilizes, something quietly profound emerges, the realization that peace was never something to be acquired, secured, or protected. It was always present as the natural condition of a mind that is not entangled in its own projections. When projections lessen, what remains is simplicity. In that simplicity, life is experienced directly, without distortion, without excess interpretation, and without the need to constantly adjust reality to fit expectation.